There's a kind of person who walks through life believing that rules are written for everyone else. They see a sign that says "do not touch," and they laugh. They see a barrier and they step over it. They see a man standing perfectly still in a red coat with a rifle on his shoulder, surrounded by tourists with cameras, and they think, "This is my moment. This is content. This is the thing I will show people later when I want them to think I am brave and funny and above the ordinary world." They are wrong. They're always wrong. But the thing about that kind of person is that they do not find out they're wrong until the exact moment when wrong becomes very, very loud. The royal guards of Britain have stood in front of palaces for over 3 centuries. 300 years of wars, revolutions, assassinations, and world events that shook every corner of the earth. And through all of it, these men stood still, straight, watching, not because they were statues, not because they were props set up for tourist photographs, but because they were trained soldiers carrying real weapons, holding a real duty that has never once been a joke. Every summer, millions of tourists pour into London. They come to see the palaces, the crowns, the history that feels like something out of story. And almost every summer, there's at least one person who decides that the Guard is the most interesting game in the city, that the bearskin hat and the red coat and the lockjaw are an invitation, a dare even to see what happens when you push. Several people have pushed. Several of those moments were filmed. And what happened next, in each case, made the rest of the world stop scrolling and sit up straight. This is the story of those moments. The tourists who laughed, and the guards who answered. Windsor Castle sits on a hill above the Thames, about 25 miles outside London, and it has been a working royal residence for nearly 1,000 years. It is not a museum. It is not a theme park. It is a real, living palace where real people live and real soldiers stand guard in real uniforms with real weapons loaded. This is the part that visitors sometimes forget, or choose to forget, which is a different thing entirely. In the summer of 2015, on a warm afternoon when the castle's walls glowed gold in the late light, and tourists crowded the pathways with their cameras and their rental maps, a group of visitors was making their way along the sentry route outside the castle. They had been there for a while. They were the kind of group that filled the space around them, loud in that particular way of people who are performing themselves for each other, always half an eye on whoever is watching. And one of them noticed the guard. He was posted at a station, as he always was, as every guard at Windsor Castle always is, standing in perfect stillness, rifle at his shoulder, bearskin hat sitting high above a face that gave away nothing. His posture was immaculate. His eyes were fixed at a point somewhere in the middle distance. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at the cameras. He stood the way a soldier stands when he has been trained so thoroughly that his body no longer requires thought to do its job. The man in the group looked at the guard. Then he looked at his friends. A grin spread across his face. He stepped up beside the guard and fell into an exaggerated march, lifting his knees high, swinging his arms, mimicking the slow ceremonial pace that the guard used when he moved between his posts. His friends watched. One of them had a phone out. Another was already laughing, the kind of quick, nervous laughter that comes when you're not quite sure something is a good idea, but you do not want to be the cautious one. The man pressed on, encouraged by the audience he had created. He marched alongside the guard for several paces, exaggerating, performing, waiting for the reaction that he was sure would come. A flicker of irritation, a suppressed smile, something that would prove the soldier was human and that he, the tourist, had been the one to crack the famous stone face. No reaction came, so he went further. He placed his hand on the soldier's shoulder, the same shoulder where the rifle rested, the same shoulder that no civilian was ever, under any circumstances, supposed to touch. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. It was captured on video. It was reported by ITV News. It was confirmed by the Ministry of Defense. The guard spun around, not slowly, not with the kind of deliberate, telegraphed movement that gives a person time to prepare. He spun fast, the way someone spins when their training takes over and their body moves before their brain has finished composing the order. The rifle, which had been resting at his shoulder a half-second before, was now leveled. The bayonet, which was not ornamental, which was not there for the photographs, was pointed directly at the tourist, who had been laughing approximately 1 second earlier, and was now frozen in a posture that no longer resembled anything funny at all. "Get back from the Queen's Guard!" The shout carried. It cut through the ordinary noise of the afternoon. The chattering tourists, the distant car engines, the sound of someone's guided tour being narrated through a little speaker, and it silenced all of it. People stopped walking. People stopped talking. Heads turned. The tourist stumbled back. The laughter had vanished from his face so completely it was as though someone had wiped it off with cloth. His friends had lowered their phones. The soldier held his position for a moment, weapons still raised, eyes fixed on the man who had just made the worst decision of his afternoon. Then, with the same precision with which he had moved, he stood down. He returned to his post. He resumed his stillness. His face closed again like a door. The Ministry of Defense, when asked about the incident later, issued a statement. The soldier's response, they said, had been an appropriate reaction. He would not be disciplined. He had followed protocol exactly as it was designed to be followed, because the protocol existed for exactly this reason. A loaded weapon resting on a soldier's shoulder is not a tourist attraction. A hand placed on that weapon by a stranger in a public space with no warning, that is a threat. It does not matter how the person placing their hand there intended it. Intent does not determine protocol. Contact does. The video spread. Within days, it was on news sites across the world. The comments filled up with the usual arguments. Some people said the soldier overreacted, that the tourist was clearly just having a laugh, that the whole thing was blown out of proportion. Other people, including quite a few who had served in the military in various countries, said the opposite. They said they were surprised the guard had shown as much restraint as he did. They said the response was measured, controlled, and entirely within the soldier's rights and duties. What nobody in the comments disagreed about was this. The tourist had stopped laughing. That group of visitors left Windsor Castle that afternoon with a story, though it was not the story they had imagined when they first decided that mocking a royal guard was the afternoon's entertainment. They had gone in planning to be the funny ones. They had wanted a video of a soldier cracking, a uniform breaking, a moment that would make their friends back home chuckle and say, "You actually did that." What they had instead was a video of a rifle pointed at a man's chest, and the sound of voice trained to command cutting through the summer air, and the particular silence that falls over a crowd when it realizes it is not watching a performance anymore. The rope that was later installed between the sentry posts at Windsor Castle and the public, the physical barrier that now separates tourists from the guards at that location, was a direct consequence of this incident, is still there. The Ministry of Defense put it in place to protect both the public and the soldiers. Because the simple, undeniable truth was that what had happened that afternoon was not funny for anyone involved, and the people in charge of the castle had decided they would rather prevent the next version of it than wait for it to happen again. The guard returned to duty. He stood at his post. He did what he had always done, which was to stand still and watch and hold his position through heat and crowd and noise and every kind of human foolishness that a busy tourist season brings past his post each day. He had not cracked. He had not smiled. He had not been embarrassed or rattled or made to feel like a prop in someone else's content. He had done his job, but this was only the beginning. Windsor Castle was not the only place where tourists had decided the guards were a game, and the guard were not the only ones keeping score. Across the months and years, the incidents accumulated, each one slightly different, each one filmed, each one shared until it circled the globe and landed in comment sections where people argued about respect and power and what it means to test a soldier who has already decided, long before you arrive with your phone out, exactly how far he will let things go. There was a summer afternoon in front of Buckingham Palace where a woman in a floral dress tried to get close enough to touch the guard's tall bearskin hat. She had been watching other tourists take photographs, calculating the exact angle and moment, convinced she was clever enough to manage it without anyone stopping her. The guard at that post had been on duty for over an hour. He had watched her approaching for several minutes before she reached him. When she came close enough, when her hand rose toward the hat, and her friends lifted their phones in anticipation, he came to attention. The crash of a military boot hitting pavement, steel-capped, hard, deliberate, is a sound unlike any other. It is not a polite sound. It is a sound designed to communicate an entire sentence in a single syllable. The woman flinched. She pulled her hand back. The guard's eyes never moved. He did not look at her. He did not need to. He had communicated everything he needed to communicate without breaking any of the rules governing how a guard on sentry duty was permitted to interact with the public. She stepped back. Her friends lowered their phones and made the noise that a group of people makes when a moment has not gone the way they planned. A sheepish exhale, a few exchanged glances, a sudden interest in the map. What people misunderstand about the Royal Guard's famous stillness is that they read it as absence. They see a man standing without moving, and they think no one is home. They think this stillness is blankness, that the locked face means the mind behind it is somewhere else, that if you just push hard enough at the outside, you will find that the whole thing is hollow. But the stillness is not absence. It is the opposite of absence. It is complete, total, undivided presence. A man paying more attention to his post, to every person moving near him, to every shift in the crowd around him, than any casual observer could imagine. The guards see everything. They clock every phone that comes up, every hand that drifts too close, every person who is separated from their group, and is making their way toward the post with the particular sideways walk of someone who wants to try something but has not yet committed. They see it all. They're trained to see it all. And they wait with the patience of people who understand that their job is not to react to everything, but to react correctly when the moment requires it. The rope at Windsor Castle went up after the 2015 incident. The rules at other locations were quietly reviewed. Signs were refreshed. The small placards reminding visitors of the distance required between themselves and the guard were made slightly more prominent. None of it stopped the next group. None of it ever does, because the kind of person who decides to test a royal guard is not the kind of person who reads a small placard. They're already past the placard. They're already reaching for the moment. They have already decided that the rules are for everyone else, and they are already looking around to make sure someone is watching. Someone was always watching. Sometimes it was the crowd. Sometimes it was a camera. And sometimes it was the guard himself, already noting the approach, already reading the posture and the energy and the direction of travel, already composing the response he was about to give, not with excitement, not with anger, but with the calm certainty of a person who has done this before and will do it again, and who knows exactly, down to the inch, how much he is prepared to let someone take before he takes it back. By the time the summer of 2015 had finished, the video of the bayonet at Windsor Castle had been watched by millions of people in dozens of countries. The guard had never given an interview. He did not have a public profile. He returned to his post, he served out his duty, and he did not comment on any of it. That too was protocol. That too was part of the job. The tourist, as far as the record shows, has never commented publicly either. There is no interview with him explaining his side of things, no statement saying it was all a misunderstanding, no appearance on a morning show to give a sheepish laugh about the afternoon. He stood in front of a pointed bayonet and stopped being funny. He exists in the video, a figure who was laughing and then was not, who reached and then stumbled back, who came to a castle expecting a joke and left with something considerably less comfortable. The world watched, and the world had opinions, and the comments filled with thousands of words in a dozen languages about who was right and who was wrong, and what the rule should be, and what the rule was. And through all of it, the guard stood at his post. Still, watching, ready. That is what he had been trained to do. That is what he did. 3 years after Windsor Castle, in the summer of 2018, another video appeared. It started circulating on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday it was everywhere, passed between phones, posted in group chats, embedded in articles with headlines that could not quite decide if the story was funny or alarming or somewhere in between. The people watching it seemed to struggle with that same question, because on the surface, the video looked almost comedic. A woman in front of Windsor Castle, a soldier in a red coat, a shove that sent her stumbling sideways and brought a short, startled scream from her lips. But when you knew the full story, it stopped being funny very quickly. The woman had been there for a while before the camera started recording. That detail matters, and it is the detail that the quick share version of the video tended to leave out. By the time the footage began, she was not a first-time offender at that particular stretch of path. According to people who were present, and according to reporting from several British outlets, including The Sun and the New Zealand Herald, she had already been warned. She had already been asked by the guard superior to step back and stop interfering with the soldier's post. A rope had been put in place, the very rope that had been installed following the 2015 bayonet incident, specifically to mark where the public was and was not permitted to stand. She had crossed it. She had been redirected back. She had crossed it again. The stories that witnesses gave were consistent. Before any camera was recording, she had tried to grab the guard's arm. She had reached for his rifle. She had made attempts at the tall bearskin hat that every tourist with a phone seems to identify as the single object in London most worth touching without permission. The guard had given the standard warnings: the boot crash, the shouted command, the reposition weapon. His superior had intervened. The rope had been pointed out to her a second time. She did not stop. When the soldier finally plowed through her, not a violent attack, not a punch or a strike, but the forward march of a man on duty who has exhausted every warning available to him and whose route cannot and will not be altered for anyone standing in it. She screamed and stumbled. The crowd gasped. Several people who had been watching looked away or moved their children to the other side. The Ministry of Defense issued a statement almost immediately, and the language of that statement was precise and deliberate. The Household Division, it said, was proud to guard the monarch and honored that people traveled from around the world to witness the ceremonies. The rope, the statement continued, was there to protect the public and the soldiers both. Visitors were asked to remain behind it at all times. It did not say the soldier was wrong. It did not apologize for what he had done. It said the rope was there for a reason, and that the reason was exactly what had just played out on camera in front of a crowd of international tourists who were now uploading it from their phones. What was interesting about the public reaction to this incident was how much it differed from the reaction to the 2015 bayonet event. With the bayonet, the crowd had mostly sided with the guard immediately. The logic was simple enough: a hand on a loaded weapon is a hand on a loaded weapon. And even people who had never served in the military could understand why that was not acceptable. But the 2018 shove produced a more divided response. Some people said the guard had been excessive, that shoving a tourist was not part of the ceremonial duty. Others said she had been warned, that she had been warned multiple times, and that the guard had shown considerably more patience than many would have managed. A few people who had worked in security or military postings wrote long and somewhat exasperated comments explaining the protocol step by step, noting that the guard had reached the final option available to him and had used it with the minimum force necessary. The woman was not seriously hurt. She stumbled, she screamed, and she got out of the way. That was the outcome. The guard resumed his march as though nothing had interrupted it, which was exactly the point, because as far as his duty was concerned, nothing had. He was where he was supposed to be, doing what he was supposed to do, and the person who had positioned herself in his path had been redirected. The march continued. But if those two incidents represent the hard edges of the story, the raised bayonet, the shove, the sharp physical language of a boundary being enforced, then there's a different kind of incident that tells an equally important part of the picture. One that spread across the internet, not because something frightening happened, but because something completely unexpected did. The video was posted to YouTube in 2014 on a channel called Moss Pack. By the time the world had fully found it, it had 90 million views. 90 million. More than most music videos, more than most news events, more than most things the internet collectively decides it cannot stop watching. The reason for that number is not complicated, but it is interesting. A tourist named Yankel was visiting London with friends, and the group made their way to one of the Royal Guard posts in the city. His friend explained the rules to him on camera, which is actually one of the more charming parts of the video. A reminder that not every tourist who approaches a guard post is doing so looking for a confrontation. Sometimes people genuinely want to stand near the history of it, want to photograph, want to feel close to something old and ceremonial and bigger than their ordinary afternoon. Yankel was told he could stand beside the guard. He could not touch him. That was it. Yankel stood beside the guard. And then, in the particular way of a man who has found his moment and decided to live inside it completely, Yankel started talking. He looked at the guard, this soldier in his red coat, rifle at his shoulder, face locked in the expression of a person who has decided he is not here, and Yankel began to spin a story. He looked at his friend with the camera and said, with total sincerity, that he and the guard had been to school together. They had known each other for 30 years. They had gone to school together in Kensington. This guard, this stoic, immovable figure in the bearskin hat, had been the quiet one in class. Never talked much. His mother had picked him up until he was 20. He paused, tilted his head, looked at the guard as though he were remembering. You'd ask him what his name was, Yankel said, and he would answer with his head. Yeah, no, yeah. He demonstrated, nodding and shaking, performing the memory of a schoolboy friend who was now, 30 years later, standing with a rifle in front of a royal palace. The guard did not move. Yankel kept going. He added details. He said the guard had always been this particular kind of guy. Very serious. Kept to himself. The kind of kid you could just tell was going somewhere specific, somewhere with a uniform in it. The guard's expression was exactly what it had been when the video started. Stone. Still. Eyes forward. And then Yankel said something about the guard's mother picking him up from school until he was 20, and the guard's lips moved. Just barely. Just enough. A curve at the corners suppressed almost immediately, but not quickly enough, not quite. His composure held, but the smile was there, a real one, the involuntary kind that a person cannot prevent when something is genuinely, helplessly funny. The crowd around Yankel erupted. His friends cheered and clapped. Yankel himself broke into a wide grin, the grin of a man who has just accomplished something he did not entirely believe he could accomplish, a man who went up against a wall and found that the wall had feelings. The camera swung toward the guard, who had resumed his march, moving down his post with the same measured steps, the brief smile already gone from his face, the soldier back in place over the man. 90 million people watched this video, and the reason those 90 million people kept watching, kept sharing, kept coming back to it, is not just that someone made a royal guard smile. It is what that moment revealed about what the guards actually are. Because Yankel had not mocked the guard. He had not tried to pull his hat or grab his arm or cross the rope. He had stood beside a soldier and talked to him like a person in a ridiculous and irreverent and genuinely creative way, and somewhere inside the protocol and the uniform and the 3 centuries of ceremonial training, a real man had been reached. The comment sections on that video are genuinely some of the kindest on the internet. One person wrote that the guard was only smiling because he wanted Yankel to stop before he accidentally revealed that the stories were all true. Another noted that this same guard appeared in multiple videos over the years and seemed to have the warmest interactions with the public of anyone at his post. Someone else mentioned a separate incident where a little girl with special needs had come to the post and asked, through tears, if she could pet the guard's horse. The guard, breaking protocol just enough, had spoken to her softly and let her do so. The rules were real. The rules were enforced rigorously whenever they needed to be. But behind the rules was a man who had chosen a life of service and discipline, who stood through heat and crowds and camera phones and every variation of human foolishness with a patience that most people would find almost incomprehensible, and who was under all of it exactly as human as the person standing in front of him. That tension between the absolute requirement of the duty and the undeniable presence of the person performing it is what makes people so endlessly fascinated by the guards. They represent something rare in modern life, a human being who has made an unconditional commitment and is keeping it publicly every day in front of witnesses. There is no day off from the stillness. There is no Tuesday when the protocol only half applies. The commitment is total, and it is performed in full view of everyone who cares to watch, which is why the people who try to break it underestimate what they're dealing with. They see the stillness and think it is a crack waiting to happen. They think the constraint is fragile, that one good joke or one well-timed shove or one hand on a shoulder will reveal the whole thing as a costume. They have misread everything in front of them, because the stillness is not fragile. The stillness is the product of years of training and genuine commitment to a duty that predates every person standing in front of that post and will outlast every person, tourist, and soldier alike who has ever stood there. When the crowd laughed at the bayonet in 2015, they were laughing at a person they had decided was not real. When that person proved otherwise, the laughter stopped. When Yankel's friends cheered in 2014, they were cheering something different. The discovery that the realness of the person inside the uniform was a thing to celebrate, not a vulnerability to exploit. The difference between those two moments is the difference between disrespect and connection, between crossing a line because you think no line is there and standing beside someone in their world and recognizing that the line means something. Both stories went around the world. Both of them told the truth, just different parts of it. And there was still one more part to come. The question that nobody quite asked, not in the news articles, not in the comment sections, not in the dozens of reaction videos and explainers and hot takes that followed each viral incident, was this: what does it actually cost to stand there? Not in the ceremonial sense, not the bearskin hat or the hours on post or the discipline to remain still while strangers take photographs 2 feet from your face. Those things are visible and known and written about. But the other cost, the one that is never quite said out loud. A guardsman who served at Buckingham Palace once described the experience in an interview, and the detail that stuck was deceptively simple. He said that when you're on post, you do not think about the crowd as a crowd. You cannot. A crowd has too many people in it, and people are unpredictable, and unpredictability is a threat classification, not a comfort. So you learn to see it differently. You learn to read it. The body language, the movement patterns, the person who is moving counter to the flow, the hand that has risen to a position that hands do not usually occupy. You watch all of it at all times while appearing to watch none of it. Every person who approaches your post carrying the energy of someone who wants to test you, he said, is a person you have already assessed before they have arrived. You know what they are going to do approximately 30 seconds before they do it. You watch them gather their nerve. You watch them look to their friends for encouragement. You watch the moment they commit to the approach, and you file it, and you prepare your response, and you wait. He was asked whether that was exhausting. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, you stop thinking about it as exhausting and start thinking about it as the job. The job is total. You're either doing it or you are not. There is no partial sentry, no guard who is 80% present and 20% somewhere else. When you're on post, you're on post. That is all there is. What strikes a person reading that is how completely at odds it is with the image that the tourists carry with them to the palace gates. They see the stillness, and they see a gap, a place where attention has been withdrawn, where the normal rules of social interaction have been suspended, where a human being has agreed to vacate the premises and leave only the uniform behind. They see an absence, and they decide to fill it. But the absence is not real. It was never real. It is perhaps the most successful performance of presence in the world. A man so completely committed to his post that the very totality of his focus reads, to the untrained eye, as vacancy. They are not looking at an empty house. They are looking at a locked one. By December of 2021, a guard at the Tower of London was caught on video knocking over a small child as he marches post. The child was fine. The tower's authorities confirmed this quickly and also confirmed that the guard had given the standard warnings before moving, that the crash of the boot and the shouted command had sounded, that the route had been announced, and that it had been an accident in the practical sense, the sense of two objects occupying the same space because one of them had not moved in time. The child's family was checked on by staff and by the soldier himself afterward. Everyone was all right. But the video produced the same division that all these videos produce. People who thought the guard should have stopped. People who explained, with varying degrees of patience, why the guard does not stop, why stopping is not the protocol, why the protocol exists, because a guard who can be stopped by anyone who positions themselves in the right place is not a guard who is securing anything. The explanation, the real one, the complete one, requires understanding something that most people in the crowd outside a palace have never been asked to understand, which is what it means to hold a post. When soldiers are trained for ceremonial duty, they are not trained to abandon their operational instincts. They are not taught to switch off the part of their mind that was built through years of genuine military service. A large percentage of the guards who stand in front of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle and the Tower of London are combat veterans. Some of them carry injuries that the uniform covers. Some of them have been to places that the tourists photographing them cannot imagine and honestly would rather not. They came back from those places and they put on the red coat and they stood at the post and they brought with them everything that made them what they were in those places: the training, the discipline, the ability to remain functional in situations that would incapacitate most people. The guard who leveled his bayonet at Windsor Castle in 2015 was not performing aggression. He was responding to a physical contact that, by any operational standard, qualified as a threat. The tourist who had placed his hand on that shoulder had done so while laughing, while performing for friends, while entirely absorbed in the entertainment of the moment. And none of that changed what his hand had done. The guard's body had not waited for an explanation of intent. The training had moved before the reasoning could. That is what training is for. That is precisely what it is for. But there is a softer version of the same truth, and it lives in the 90 million view video and in the story about the little girl and the horse. Because the guards are also, evidently and undeniably, capable of the full range of human response. The guard who smiled at Yankel's story had not failed at his post. He had revealed something that the people who come to test the guards are, in their way, always looking for: the proof that there's a person inside. Yankel found that proof. He found it without grabbing anything, without crossing any rope, without reaching for a hat. He found it by being genuinely funny in a way that had nothing hostile in it, that was aimed at delight rather than dominance. The guard who spoke softly to the little girl about the horse had not broken protocol in any meaningful way. He had made a call, the kind of call that people with good judgment and genuine humanity make when a moment asks for flexibility, and he had made it correctly. Nobody watching that interaction was under any illusion that the guard was available to be played with. He had spoken to a child who needed something, and then he had returned to his post. These moments exist alongside the bayonet and the shove and the boot crash and the shouted commands, and they're all part of the same picture. They are all expressions of the same person in different circumstances, responding to different things in the way that his training and his character together determined was right. What the internet tends to do with these videos is separate them from each other. The aggressive guard is one thing, the smiling guard is another, and the two images live in different corners of the feed and rarely appear together. But they're not two different people. They are one person responding correctly to two very different situations. The tourist who grabbed the shoulder was looking for a performance. The tourist who made the guard smile was looking for a connection. Both found what they were looking for. Both got exactly what they brought to the post. In the years after the rope was installed at Windsor Castle, the incidents at that specific post decreased. The physical barrier did what barriers do. It changed the calculation, removed the easy option, made visible the line that had always been there, but had previously required a person to read. People who wanted to get close to the guards had to actively decide to cross a rope rather than simply drift too near. Most of them decided not to. But at other posts around London, across the months and years, the videos continued to appear. A guard at St. James's Palace, in an incident from that same era, was filmed stepping forward from his post toward a man who was dancing and singing in front of him. The guard bellowed a single word: halt. And the man halted. He halted in the way that a person halts when a sound has rearranged something in their nervous system. The dancing stopped. The singing stopped. He stood very still for a moment that was not ceremonial at all, and then he moved away. The guard returned to his position. He stood. Each of these moments, taken individually, looks like an isolated story, a funny one or a frightening one, depending on the angle you're watching from. But taken together, they tell something larger. They tell it in a language that does not have many words, the language of a person who is committed entirely to something and will not be moved from it, who will respond to what is required and hold back from what is not, who will smile when Yankel talks about school and level a bayonet when a hand lands on his shoulder, and who will distinguish between those two situations with a clarity and speed that no amount of tourist energy, however loud or confident or viral-seeking, has ever successfully disrupted. More than 3 centuries, 5 regiments of the Foot Guards, 2 regiments of the Household Cavalry, thousands of soldiers across hundreds of years, standing watch over the same buildings, in roughly the same uniforms through weather and war and revolution and the changing of every conceivable kind of crown. Every summer brings another wave of visitors. Every wave brings someone who looks at the stillness and sees a challenge in it. None of them have won, not in any meaningful sense, because the game, as they understand it, was never really available to play. The guards are not frozen. They're not hollow. They are not statues built for the amusement of people with phones. They are trained soldiers holding a post that has been held continuously since the 17th century, and every person who has stood where they stand has understood something that the tourists circling with their cameras have not quite grasped. That discipline, real discipline, the kind that comes from years of genuine commitment and genuine training, is not a fragile thing. It does not crack under a joke. It does not fold under a hand on a shoulder. It does not waver when someone marches alongside it in mockery or snaps their fingers in its face or crosses the rope that a government installed specifically to prevent exactly the moment that is now happening. It holds. It has always held. And the next time someone looks at a man in a red coat and a bearskin hat and thinks to themselves that the silence looks like an invitation, that the stillness looks like a gap, that the locked jaw looks like something worth testing, they should remember the bayonet. They should remember the shove. They should remember the sound of a boot hitting pavement and a voice cutting through a crowd and a laugh that stopped mid-breath. They should remember the rope. The rope is not decoration. The rope is the lesson. They thought it was funny. The Royal Guard proved otherwise.